Before we kick off this next session, we have a little video that we would like to show you. So anybody who actually attended last night, we're showing you the same video. But we have, as part of our sort of campaign in terms of engaging with off-takers around industry and those diesel-reliant industries that we're seeking to work with to be able to enable, we've wrapped a Ford Ranger, 2024 Ford Ranger, and we have refuelled that on 100% renewable diesel. It was actually refuelled yesterday in Canberra. So it was a bit of a mad cut and rush to get this little video put together. But this Ford Ranger will be going to all sorts of trade shows. I think it's already got its next visit booked in, which is Diesel and Dirt at Eastern Creek, which is where all the caterpillars and the big machinery is. So we will be there talking about renewable diesel to these industries that really need it. Mac, there's plenty of seats down the front here. Jennifer, down the front. Thank you. So I will cue to the video. Now, obviously, it's not the new diesel. For anybody who's worked in other jurisdictions and other countries, it's been there for quite a while, but it is new here. So we're branding it as the new diesel. If anybody is interested in having the Ford Ranger and an industry expert coming along to something, please reach out to us. We would love to. So this next session is all about those diesel-reliant industries. We have quite a bumper lineup. For anyone that knows the way that we run Renewable Fuels Week, it's almost speed dating for renewable fuels. So it is seeding information, building connections, enabling that connection to take place afterwards, and for people to be able to accelerate projects and outcomes. I'm delighted to introduce Lisa Archbold, who is from BP, who is our session sponsor for this session, and she is going to just introduce us to this session. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Shahana. I always have to point these down when I come up to the stage. Welcome to the after lunch session. So hopefully we can keep you entertained as your bodies digest your lunch, and we hope you really enjoy what is going to be a really entertaining session. But I'd like to start by paying my respects to the traditional owners of the land we meet on today, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, as well as paying my respects to the elders past and present of all Australia's Indigenous peoples. As Shahana said, I'm Lisa Archbold and I'm from BP. I run our regions, corporates and solutions team. My team's focused on providing regions and corporates innovative and integrated decarbonised energy solutions at scale. So it's fantastic to be here at Australian Renewable Fuels Week, engaging across industry. We've got a brilliant panel of diverse industry players here today. So sort of getting together with government, with industry, with customers and with our peers to discuss the renewable diesel and ground fuels. The conversation about sustainable aviation fuel this morning was fantastic. I really enjoyed that last session, particularly on the projects and the progress being made. So sustainable aviation fuel has kicked us off so far with a flying start. So now we're going to take it to ground with a session on decarbonising diesel-resilient industries. I hope you liked the little joke in there. I do recognise that I'm standing here before you talking about the energy transition and decarbonisation as a representative of a company with over 100 years of history in hydrocarbons, in oil and gas. In fact, in Australia, BP supplies fuel at over 1,200 service stations across the country. We provide around 2 billion litres of diesel a year to our mining customers, and we fuel on average around 45 flights per hour. Oops, sorry. All of this keeps Australia moving now, and all of this means we also play a key role in helping the country and our customers decarbonise for the future. Like the rest of the world, we're committed to transitioning to net zero. Through leveraging our many years of experience and expertise, we can help hit fast forward on developing an Australian renewable fuels industry. And really, that's what we're here to talk about. We know that pace for this is really critical. In BP's 2023 Energy Outlook, it suggests that with the global actions we've taken to date as a globe, the trajectory we are on does not get us to the Paris commitments. Australia is not an exception to this at all. For the country to be on track to meet our net zero ambition, as you know, we're targeting levels of 43% below 2005 levels by 2030. That's a really tall ask. As Minister Bowen shared in his address to Parliament following the annual climate change statement, while I'm pleased with our progress, I'm not yet satisfied. The job is far from done. I think we've all seen today that that is so true, and I couldn't agree more. So while we've got progress being made, there's still a lot more to do. We need policies in place today to help transform the energy mix tomorrow. Today, around 95% of medium and heavy-duty trucks are fuelled by diesel. More than 99% of the flights are fuelled using traditional jet fuel. The current marine fleet relies almost entirely on oil products. These hard-to-abate industries are also set to grow. The aviation industry, for example, is expected to double to over 8 billion passengers by 2050. And so the rapid decarbonisation of our energy system isn't the only priority. The world is showing us time and time again, we also need a secure energy system. So whilst these industries are growing, we need to decarbonise, but we also need to ensure the security of those energy systems while these industries grow. Energy diversity is intrinsically linked to energy security. Developing a homegrown renewable fuels industry could enhance Australia's liquid fuel supply chain and strengthen the critical industries that they serve. We talked in the last session about supporting locally produced or locally produced SAF or renewable diesel. I think that's a really critical thing that we need to be thinking about. But we need to act. We really need to make changes to the way that we power these industries. It will take a mix of technologies, electrification, as well as low carbon fuels like renewable diesel, sustainable aviation fuel, and hydrogen. There isn't one single solution, and that's what we've been talking about here together this morning. At BP, we also see a pathway for all of them, with the best option dependent on end use, and it will change over time. But again, the key here is timing. In the short to medium term, renewable fuels are the most viable decarbonisation solution for the mining, heavy industry, and aviation sectors. According to the modelling, again in our Energy Outlook, the production of biofuels roughly triples in the accelerated and the net zero scenarios by 2050. Why does it do this? Because renewable fuels have a distinct advantage. Not much needs to change. The vehicles remain the same, the refineries and the infrastructure can be repurposed, and the supply chains already exist. And with this, they offer emission savings of up to 90% for renewable diesel and up to 80% for sustainable aviation fuel compared to traditional fuels. We know that the drop-in solution works. Last year, BP partnered with a major mining company to trial the supply of renewable diesel for their operations in the Pilbara. By using diesel blended with hydrogenated vegetable oil, or HVO, they successfully reduced their carbon footprint during the trial. No change to equipment or process was needed. The use of renewable diesel in mining operations highlights the advantage it currently has over other decarbonisation pathways. Conversely, getting green electrons to a remote mine site has many variables that we haven't solved for yet. There's a challenge around transmission, not to mention the cost of investment, particularly in the current market. So, while electrification does have a role to play in the future, renewable fuels are here now. As I mentioned earlier, the requirement of energy goes beyond lowering emissions intensity, and we've talked about this today already. Through developing a thriving homegrown renewable fuels industry, Australia can benefit from enhanced energy security. Australia's agricultural sector is already a major feedstock provider for foreign biofuels markets, exporting volumes equivalent to between 1 and 3 billion litres of fuel a year. That is substantial in the context of Australia's overall liquid fuel demand. Directing this feedstock and the potential for expansion towards Australia's fuel supply could have a material impact on our fuel security. Furthermore, the development of technology and growth for renewable fuels results in additional opportunities for Australia's economy. As an advantaged producer of biofeedstocks, ARENA estimates that an Australian biofuels industry could contribute around $10 billion in extra GDP per annum by 2030 and lead to an additional 26,000 jobs. In particular, regional areas of Australia have an important role to play in feedstock production and feedstock collection. These areas will be critical to construct and manage supporting infrastructure, supply chains, and fuel production. The activity could provide high-value jobs and enhance development in regional Australia. At BP, we're progressing plans to transform our former oil refinery at Kwinana, about 40 kilometres south of Perth, into an integrated energy hub that produces and supplies renewable fuels and energy products. And you can see an image of that on the screen behind me. The planned biorefinery is expected to produce around 15 million litres of renewable fuels per day, including sustainable aviation fuel, renewable diesel and bio-naphtha. It makes it the largest project of its type in Australia. Kwinana Renewable Fuels leverages the existing infrastructure and integration with wharfage, tankage pipelines and terminal operations, including into Perth Airport. Plus, Kwinana is in one of the biggest, most active industrial areas in Australia, with customers at the hub's doorstep. Our Kwinana project is therefore well positioned to support the transition to low carbon fuels. However, like other projects transforming our energy system, and again we've talked about this today, it's complex. It requires major investment, and renewable fuels have a green premium compared to its fossil alternatives. To drive the uptake of renewable fuels at the pace and the scale required, frameworks and policies are needed to close the gap. Again, we've talked about these many times today. Things like existing policies, in particular the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Scheme and safeguard mechanisms, could be leveraged to unlock immediate offtake for these fuels and help reduce direct emissions, as could integrating renewable fuels into the Fuel Quality Act. But we could go further. An Australian sustainability standard and certification system with a regulatory framework and administration would add credibility and confidence. And this is important not just for customers, it's important for investors. The introduction of dedicated funding to underwrite supply and support further development would complement existing concessional finance in supporting the rise of renewable fuels domestic industry. Again, important. And finally, a low carbon fuel standard or similar incentive would help close the cost differential of renewable fuels, thereby supporting demand. And again, that's been mentioned several times today. With these settings to underpin investment and develop and scale the industry, Australia can unlock its renewable fuel superpower. As we're hearing today, producers and customers are aligned on the crucial role renewable fuels have to play in decarbonising hard-to-abate sectors and are ready to grow its use, including BP. The time is now to secure Australia's renewable future. So it is now my pleasure to introduce the presenters for this session. We have 7 of them, so you'll be hearing a whole range of diverse views and thoughts, so I'm really looking forward to the discussion. We have Robert Cavicchiolo from Viva Energy Australia, Taku Ide from Cleanaway Waste Management, Alan Dobie from CSL Australia, Willem du Plessis from Rio Tinto, Mark Hammond from the Truck Industry Council, Abigail Heywood from Lendlease and Australian Constructors Association, that's a mouthful, and Michael Cashen, New South Wales Department of Primary Industries and Agriculture. Before I hand over to them, I do want to draw your attention to the slide on the screen, and you can see that it features in our BP stand as well. A digger out in the red dirt in the Pilbara. A passenger jet flying overhead. Other than the fuel in the tank, nothing changes. But together we've reduced Australia's emissions, we've boosted the economy and enhanced energy security. Thank you for your time, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Over to you, I think, Robert.
Well, you've done a great job, Lisa, because you probably stole about half of my presentation. So, but it's good to see we've got some alignment across industry. For those people in the room who don't know who Viva Energy is, essentially we were born out of a divestment by Shell 2014. Viva Energy's essentially formed there. Our major shareholder at that particular time was our largest independent oil trader, Vitol. Recent times, we continue to obviously expand what our capabilities are in Australia, and now we're a listed company on the ASX, which is something we're very proud of. Three main distinctive areas within Viva Energy. The first one is what we call our convenience and mobility sector, typically known as our retail sector, but we've renamed that convenience because we see the transition happening on that space. So to the layperson out there, the Shell service stations and other platforms, including Liberty, Westside and so forth, all fall underneath that convenience and mobility sort of sector. Second part is our energy and infrastructure side part of the business. So that's our terminals, depots all around Australia, and importantly, one of the two remaining refineries in Australia down at Geelong. So something we're very proud of, continuing to invest in that facility and have that local manufacturing capabilities of hydrocarbons, in this case, diesel, to serve the market. And the third is where I sort of belong in, is our commercial and industrial sector, which essentially is the B2B business. So that's where I sort of fall under in terms of carbon solutions as such. So I look after the carbon solutions business, which essentially was formed about 3 years ago now, with its prime aim and requirement is really to help our customers decarbonise. So we talk to all different industry sectors, be it on-road transport, be it marine, aviation, the ADF, which Gavi mentioned us earlier today, through to polymers, chemicals, bitumen, power gen, manufacturing. Pretty much everywhere there's a conventional hydrocarbon source or supply, we're talking to about decarbonisation. What this does really gives us some really great clues and insights of where the market's moving, what is importantly driven, and this is really going to be focused, my presentation, around what not Viva Energy are essentially doing, but what customers are driving the conversation to help them decarbonise, and what we're doing in part of that conversation. So quite a really great place to work in at the moment. Really that eagle view at this stage, and most definitely starting to see some really rapid progression in terms of from discussion, lots of discussion, particularly over the last 12 to 18 months, to now implementation. And you'll hear a couple of those here, hopefully on the panel today, what they've done. So we'll move along. We too have a roadmap as such, but we break it into two different distincting areas. And I'd like to view this as a stepping stone approach. So embracing the technologies which are now and existing and have been in the marketplace for a considerable amount of time. Those which are like renewable diesel are available for displacement of conventional diesel now, and also other technologies which can be done. And I think when you start to look across the different types of industry sectors that we talk to, there's no one silver bullet, as a lot of people will say. There's no one essentially pathway that's going to be the determining pathway going forward. But we do recognise that a number on the left-hand side there's opportunities to progress and go forward with that. We'll talk about that a little bit. On the right-hand side, we call it future horizons. Future horizons are those emerging technologies or pathways which are coming down the pipeline as such. Some which are starting to emerge now in some form of capacity or scale within Australia, but others which are either driven by opportunities or essentially pathways or technology solutions which Viva Energy will play some part form in the near future. So we'll go on the left-hand side here as such. I like to talk, so I've got to keep this under 10 minutes is what I've been told. So there's a lot of different options, and that's the complexity that we actually face. as such. So that stepping stone approach is really important for our customers. And what they're going to do is obviously utilise their existing asset base right now. And some of that asset base may be, for road transport, might be an average life of a 12 or 15 year for a truck. For marine, it might be 20 to 30 years. For aviation, their airframes might have to be certified as they get passed down through the different customers and the owners up to 25, 30 years. So we'll really have to develop a stepping stone and a clear pathway of how we actually can help those customers decarbonise, whilst keep them running, importantly, as of today, and keep them operating as their requirements demand and their own customers demand. So whilst I'm not going to touch on all of them today, there's a few that I'm going to focus on today's solutions on the left-hand side here. There are existing technologies or solutions or product in the marketplace around addivated diesels, lubricant technologies, low viscometric technologies, which drive essentially fuel efficiencies or reduce fuel burn, which obviously in turn reduces carbon footprint. So these things have been around for a significant amount of time. But what we're starting to see now is the emergence of obviously drop-in alternative fuels. As Lisa did mention, up to about 90% reduction in terms of CO2 or greenhouse gas over that life cycle analysis or assessment. So it's really attractive. No change in terms of assets, no change in terms of infrastructure, and importantly, minimal, if any, change in terms of actually operability of those type of fuels. We too have been playing in sustainable aviation fuel. Obviously, that was covered this section, but what we'll probably concentrate on is probably from the left-hand side, from 6 o'clock through to probably 10 o'clock as such on the three areas. So biodiesel, biofuels, typically the traditional biofuel diesel has been in the marketplace of FAME or fatty acid methyl ester, well established, locally manufactured. There's suppliers such as Just Biodiesel up at Barnawaffa there, North East Victoria, have been supplying that into the marketplace, and we've been utilising that. So there's some obviously existing legacy there that we can reactivate for a lot of our customers, and some of our customers are most definitely are going down that pathway as they start to look at decarbonising their fuels. So it comes with some restrictions. Typically on the on-road transport, there may be blend rates which are capping the amount of actually FAME biodiesel which can be blended into traditional conventional diesel. Some may be up to B7 or 7%, some up to 20%. But there are OEMs there who are still approving FAME biodiesel up to 100%. We see it transitioning away from essentially the main type of liquid fuel into renewable diesel, but we still see biodiesel, the old FAME biodiesel, as a critical part for some niche areas, and that may form in the supply chain of harder to abate sectors like the marine sector, which will essentially look at the first stepping stone for them as blending essentially a FAME component into a heavy fuel oil as such, as considerable amount of ships are still using residual fuels across the globe. So again, there's some capacity there to push that type of technology as they start to explore other solutions such as methanol, hydrogen, ammonia and so forth. So we still see it there. Again, other areas, maybe rail, for example, where there's not so many restrictions around the blend rates as such as found on the on-road transport. So, but more importantly, we also see renewable diesel coming to the forefront, and we've seen that now move from customer talks to implementation, and it was great to be involved with stealing Taku's thunder with Cleanaway just recently to do a neat R100, one of the first trials in Australia to push that through their fleet of waste vehicles. And we're seeing a lot of traction, and obviously driven by a number of factors in renewable diesel in particular. And these are restrictions around the OEM's approval, being available blend from anything from obviously 5% right up to 100% adoption in those type of vehicles as such for on-road. We also see it from a supply and infrastructure side of things, an easy transition for our customers, an easy transition for the vehicles, and also a drop-in solution. And we put it on today's solutions because it's here, it's now, it's available. What's not available, essentially, is on the right-hand side, is the national supply infrastructure and the capability to scale this up into the marketplace. We're still on that journey, and Viva Energy are very much invested in bringing this into the marketplace and driving that sector. I've got a 1 minute wrap up, so I'm going to take a couple more minutes, unfortunately. So I'm sorry about that in advance. So on the right-hand side, we've got future horizons. I just want to touch on a couple of things we're doing there. Obviously, hydrogen EV through our new energy service station. It will be one of the first commercial, traditional service stations that Viva will bring to the market, where anyone with a hydrogen vehicle will be able to roll up, essentially fill up with hydrogen at a typical service station experience. So that's really exciting. That's turning soil as we speak now. So that's real, it's evident, it's going to come online. Some great partners there with Cleanaway again, Toll, CDC buses and Bar and Water, and again with support from ARENA funding and obviously some state government funding there. The other thing around this is co-processing. We have a refinery. We have an asset already built that's in use, and we can actually start to look at low carbon feedstocks and plumbing that in to that facility to produce low carbon fuels. We don't have to wait for the investment or FIDs as such on the grand scale, and we can start to look at what waste and residue and other feedstocks can be brought into the marketplace right now using that facility. So that's really exciting for us. That'll generate obviously some low carbon fuel output from that, and we tend to obviously sell that into the marketplace with our customers. As we go around, we're technology agnostic, synthetic fuels and powder liquids or alcohol, everything we talked about today, we're not backing one stream. So we're agnostic in terms of technology selection. What we do recognise is that we're going to need multiple pathways to get to obviously a net zero carbon future. Last slide, and we'll whip right through it. Emission reporting. So I just want to break out, it doesn't always mean we need physical blend of product into the marketplace. Because if there is things such as mandates or requirements to have national availability of blended fuels, such as a renewable 5 or renewable 10 as such, we need the infrastructure to back that up. So that's physical supply infrastructure like blending at gantries, putting it in tank storage and the like. It's most definitely something that customers are requiring this and want this, but it's not the only way. What we also see is a mass balancing approach. So customers who are looking on a national scale might be using renewable diesel at one site and amortising their emission benefits across their total volume. So there are different ways of cutting this mustard, so to speak. There is an emission certificate approach. We talked about it in a similar in SAF discussion around about book and claim. We still see that as a very important potential pathway as well. And most importantly, we see traceability, the provenance of the feedstock and certification of that feedstock becoming top of mind of customers. Customers now understand that renewable diesel works. It can be substituted into their equipment, but what they're really keen to understand is where that feedstock comes from, because they're going to be making public statements, they're going to be making emission reports, so they want to make sure that provenance and feedstock is certified across the necessary body. For us in Viva, we've gone down an ISCC certification pathway. But what this sort of means that we're going to have to need a combination of all of those top points. Overall, customer landscape, we're going to essentially need to collaborate. I think that's the new buzzword for everything. It was pivot during COVID. I'll probably announce it as it's now to collaborate or collaboration in 2024. But our customers have a really difficult discussion. That's about 20 minutes worth, so I appreciate everyone's time, and we've got plenty of time on the panel to have any questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and I'll try to keep mine short. Thank you, Shahana, Adele, Bioenergy Australia, first and foremost, and the sponsors for having me here this afternoon and inviting me to this great event. My name is Taku Ide. I currently serve as the head of carbon and circularity at Cleanaway. So in that role, what do? I think about two things in my role. The first thing is the decarbonization of Cleanaway. So I try to make sure that Cleanaway is on a great 1.5 degree emissions glide scope. And then I think about decarbonization through Cleanaway, which is supporting our customers' ambitions as to how they might be able to reach their climate ambitions through Cleanaway. And what I'm going to talk about today is the use of HVO 100. It's made from used cooking oil that we collect, and we use that HVO 100. This demonstration is used, as Rob talked about, in 2 of our fleets, 2 trucks in our fleet. and we'll talk about that. So how does this fit into the overall Cleanaway vision? So at Cleanaway, we're really excited to be a part of enabling Australia's circular economy and defining what that may be and putting that into place. And we often view ourselves as the beginnings of the resilient and circular and low carbon economy here in Australia. And examples that we participate in today, so we do plastics for bottles to bottles. We have our head of innovation here. He can talk way more about that. We participate in used oil markets, so collecting used oil and then producing refurbished and re-refined base oil feedstocks for HVO 100, which is what we're going to talk about today. And we have been making quite a bit of investments in each of these spaces, and we'll continue to identify more circular and low carbon opportunities as they arise, and how we can then, as a waste industry, participate in that economy. So HVO 100, the challenge is that our fleet emissions, so we have about 5,600 trucks in our fleet, and it's about 20% of our carbon emissions. And this 5,600 trucks, it serves about 130 councils, and we have 150,000 C&I customers, SME customers. And we've also publicly committed to incrementally decarbonizing our entire operations. So wearing the first hat of decarbonization of Cleanaway, we have to make sure that we have to reduce our CO2 emissions aligned with that. So as a part of that, it is a hard to abate. So as a part of that program, what have we done? In 2019, we began our EV trials. And the issue, one of the things that we're figuring out is that through extensive testing, EV really hard on payloads. We haven't given up on EV, but for heavy cabs, it often does not carry and cannot carry the weight that we need to service our hundreds and thousands of customers. So fuel cell vehicles, FCVs, hydrogen, do we believe that that's the way of the future? Absolutely. And right now we're modeling it as something, as a solution beyond 2032. We do see that as a long-term solution. However, the challenge, as Rob said and mentioned, is that we have assets that are already in play. So the 5,600 trucks that we have in play, each of those assets have a 10 to 15 year asset life. And somehow we have to maximize the value of those assets while still staying true to the commitment that we made to the public of incrementally decarbonizing our emissions. So how do we do that? Well, one of the ways in which we can do that is through the use of HVO 100. So through this demonstration, we're using HVO 100 in two different trucks. One is a front lift. It collects FOGO from coals. And then the other one is a side lift for the city of Casey collecting regular MSW. The carbon intensity savings that we've calculated for this demonstration is quite significant. So using, together with Nest, we have done some extensive calculations. It saves about 91% compared to the landed fossil fuels in Australia. And we know that we can potentially save up to 95% carbon intensity depending on the different pathways. So we've been doing this trial or this demonstration since February. The good, so there are three. One is that there's no infrastructure change, no significant infrastructure change besides putting another tank on our site. Performance and safety, no issues there at all. What that means is that we have very happy folks at Cleanaway at the BU level, at the business unit level, who don't have to do anything different for their O&M programs. So happy employees, it's great. And also the customer feedback has been tremendous. And one of the reasons why the customers like Coles, City of Casey, appreciate this approach is because they don't have to offset the emissions. It's a real emissions reduction. We are able to claim it in our NGERs, and our Scope 1 emissions reduction is absolutely 100% passed on to their Scope 3 emissions reduction. So for that reason, the real emissions reduction, very exciting opportunity for our customers. Now the bad. Supply chain logistics, remains an issue. Thanks to Viva and the Neste folks out there, we have been able to make this demonstration a successful one. Fuel standards and exemptions. Thanks to Trent at DQ, we were able to get that over the line, but still it takes a little bit of time, and that's being worked on. And as I understand it, that's in the works to try to cut some of that time down. And also, as it has been mentioned throughout the morning and this afternoon as well, the price and the green premium continues to be a challenge. But these challenges give rise to opportunities, and I think now is the time. It gives us an opportunity to debate and discuss and decide on what we want to do here in Australia. So, for example, we can reduce the red tape and make the fuel quality standards easier. Another example could be for us to borrow as much as we can from the European systems, the US systems, and those systems, like the LCFS, has made these international markets a place where you have great demand and you have a booming economy for those who want to supply into those frameworks. And of course, as Cleanaway, one of the things that we can do at this type of roundtable and get together is we try to decide what the best is for Australia. We can continue to feed our results from demonstrations, the learnings, the headaches, and we can contribute that way. And hopefully, what we're hoping for is that we have a great, healthy debate with multiple industry players and policymakers alike going forward. And so we're really excited to be a part of this. Thanks to all the partners who have made this demonstration absolutely successful. And we look forward to keeping you all informed. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Lisa for that excellent introduction earlier, and I'd like to thank Shahana and Bioenergy Australia for inviting us to participate in this forum. I think it's pretty important that we're here as shipping. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alan Dobie. I'm a career shipping and maritime professional with a considerable passion for decarbonization of our sector, and I'm here representing CSL Australia. And, if I may, the wider Australian maritime industry through my chairmanship of Maritime Industry Australia, which is the peak body for shipping in Australia. I'd just like to start by talking a little bit about this vessel. You've seen a lot of aircraft today. This vessel is a modern pneumatic cement carrier, very efficient by international standards. But this will give you an idea of the scale of the challenge and opportunity that we've got with renewable fuels with our sector. So that ship will carry about 25,000 tons of cement on a voyage. When it is underway, as you see it there, it will consume about 20 tons per day of fuel oil. It will consume about 9 tons per day when it's discharging cargo at 1,000 tons an hour, which is very fast. So that just puts into perspective the maritime sector versus, let's say, Taku, where you've got many, or a very high number of smaller assets with smaller consumption, but in aggregate is a big number. Well, we're a big number, lumpy assets, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. So CSL is a global ship owner that's headquartered in Montreal, Canada, and has a sizable operational footprint here in Australia. No, we're unrelated to that big pharmaceutical giant that has the same name. We operate a fleet of 15 vessels here in Australia, specialized self-unloaders. We don't play in the wider shipping market per se. We are a coastal carrier. We transport approximately 7 million tons of cement aggregates and gypsum and mineral sands across the coast here in the south and east of Australia. We transship about 20 million tons of export iron ore out of shallow draft ports in Australia onto large size, Cape-size vessels sailing for the Far East. Our fleet consumes approximately 40,000 tons of fuel oil per annum. This translates into about 130,000 tons of CO2 emissions per annum. We need to change this. We're committed to change this. So a bit more about our assets. So these assets are capital intensive. They're specialized, they're expensive. They're relatively long life. A new ship in our fleet will run 30 to 35 years. And our existing fleet, which is our real concern here, many of them have 10 to 15 years to run until end of life. These assets are regulated internationally for emissions and decarbonization. These assets are also operating in hard-to-abate sectors, such as cement and steel production. So our customers are indeed feeling the pressure to decarbonize, and that translates down to us as Scope 2 for them. So we have every bit of incentive to work with our customers, to work with our industry to decarbonize. So why am I flagging all of this to you today? Well, really, maritime appears to be distant in profile and priority to other sectors. You heard a lot about aviation this morning. There are other land-based sectors which tends to get a lot of attention, but it's got to be a priority for us to raise our profile, to band together as an industry and find a way to decarbonize. Now, why renewable fuels? Well, we see this as a drop-in, zero capital solution to our decarbonization for our existing assets. Now, let me be clear. Minister King this morning was talking about how Australia is working towards future fuels and the investment in future fuels and future options. And we're invested in that long-term journey. However, we have a legacy fleet of existing assets that need to be decarbonized. So why is biofuel viewed as such a good option for the maritime industry? Well, CSL has some very, very good experience, relevant experience with our fleet in Canada. For the last 3 years, we've been running 8 vessels in our fleet. For 6 months a year, we've logged over 60,000 engine hours on B100. B100 as a drop-in. We've had no negative effects to plant or equipment. And what we have experienced is an energy loss of about 8% relative to fuel oil. But you know what? For us, in our commitment to decarbonization and our customers, we find that an acceptable cost to decarbonization. But I think a very important point to make here is in Canada, we're able to obtain that biofuel at near parity to fuel oil. How is this? Through government incentives and through carbon credit markets. This is key. Now, another important point is we are consuming Generation 2 biofuel in Canada. So this is made from an animal feed production waste. So we get maximum benefit for using this fuel. A little bit more about our biofuel program going forward. Well, we're well beyond trial period now. We see this well and truly embedded into our program in Canada, and we want to expand it. We will continue this year with another 8 vessels running 6 months. And you might wonder why 6 months? Well, we do get concerned about biofuel and its viscosity in cold weather. And where we operate, it can be rather cold. So we expect to consume approximately 16,000 tons plus of biofuel per annum. We'll log roughly 27,000 engine hours on these vessels per annum. But I think most importantly, we're able to reduce our emissions by 34,000 tons. That's a 70 to 80% reduction in our CO2 emissions. Now, we would dearly like to replicate this in Australia. So, we've got all the right people in the room today. This is our request. Number one, don't forget about Australian shipping. We're here, we're ready. What do we need? Well, we need access to supply certainty, and we need scalability. As you can see, we have a massive opportunity here, but they're big numbers. Secondly, we need near price parity with fuel oils, in particular marine gas oil. That is key, and that's what's really worked for us in Canada. So here, the renewable fuel sector, government and stakeholders, well, you've got an opportunity right now to help us decarbonize. We hope that you all dig in with us and find a way. I think there's a willing cohort right here in this room to make this happen. And I'd just like to say thank you. And I'll hand some time back. I'll hand some time back to our panel.
Good day, everyone. It is a great privilege for me to be here today to contribute to the discussions around Australian renewable fuels and to share with you Rio Tinto's renewable diesel journey from trial to adoption. I'm Willem du Plessis. I'm responsible for global hydrocarbon and biofuel procurement for Rio Tinto. I'm also very passionate about decarbonisation, so 10 minutes is not enough, and I encourage you, please ask your questions to the panel. If you see me in the corridor, you're welcome to grab me and have a further discussion. Rio Tinto acknowledges that we have an important role to play in the energy transition. We have truly ambitious targets. We committed to reduce Scope 1 and 2 carbon emissions by 50% by 2030 and to net zero by 2050. In 2022, Rio Tinto's emissions were 30.3 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent. Around 60% of that generated in Australia, and about 16% of that related to use of fossil diesel. Diesel is our primary energy source for our core mining operations. The long-term solution to transition away from fossil fuels is seen as electrification. However, current battery technology, as found in electric cars, does not have the energy density required to power the heavy equipment that we need to power them. And so we're not expecting wide-scale deployment of electric fleet in our business before 2030. Given the complexity and time frame that we expect to develop large-scale competitive electrification of mobile equipment, we are studying transitional low-emissions fuels that can help in reducing fossil fuel emissions. And in particular, the use of drop-in replacement fuels like renewable diesel allows us to reduce emissions right now and in the short to longer term. And it complements the ongoing work towards the commercial readiness of longer-term technical solutions required. And so renewable diesel is a pragmatic solution. It is something that we can do right now, and we can impact greenhouse gas emissions today. It requires no change to how we operate and requires no technological breakthrough. Our journey with renewable diesel started at Rio Tinto's US Borax operation, where haul truck trials were conducted in 2022 in partnership with Rolls-Royce, the engine original equipment manufacturer, and Neste supplying and producing and supplying the renewable diesel. This trial was really important. I can't overemphasize that. Whilst there's been strong support throughout, and it's not really hard to get everybody excited about decarbonisation projects, there was certainly skepticism in the solution, and in particular doing it at the scale that we are looking at deploying this within mining. And so The results from the trial showed that the trucks running on renewable diesel delivered similar performance and reliability compared to trucks running on fossil diesel. Based on these very encouraging and positive results, Rio Tinto US Borax continued to work with Rolls-Royce, Neste, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the state of California to fully transition its heavy machinery fleet on-site to renewable diesel by the end of May 2023. And I've got to emphasize this transition includes every drop of diesel on site. It includes heavy machinery, haul trucks, loaders. It includes the renewable diesel used in blasting as well. The change to renewable diesel brings an anticipated CO2 equivalent benefit of up to 45,000 tonnes per annum, comparable to eliminating the annual emissions of approximately 9,600 cars. Now, that's something that we're going to have a one-year anniversary for not too far in the future, which is going to be quite exciting. This project was not only a major milestone, but also a critical learning experience. And it demonstrated the efficacy of this pathway and also how we can bring the partnerships together to make it work. It's an excellent example of what can happen when internal and external stakeholders collaborate toward a carbon reduction goal. And without the support from the state of California, this would not have been possible. More needs to be done, though. That was the start, and we've taken a much bigger step in a continuation on this journey, where we've recently announced that Rio Tinto will replace its entire fossil diesel consumption at the Kennecott copper operation in Utah by the middle of this year. Kennecott is a much larger operation than US Borax. It includes a fleet of 90 haul trucks, all heavy machinery, and there's diesel consumption in applications at the concentrator, smelter, and refineries, and not only mobile applications. The transition will reduce Kennecott's Scope 1 carbon emissions by approximately 495,000 tonnes per annum. That is equivalent to 107,000 cars on the road. Another significant benefit from doing this is improving the air quality in the Salt Lake Valley, in particular through the reduction in particulate emissions that's related to diesel burn. This trial was conducted in collaboration with Cummins and allowed testing renewable diesel in different operating environments, particularly in very cold conditions. This trial also supported the original equipment manufacturer to approve its own approval for use of 100% renewable diesel in its equipment. In this 7-month trial, the team tested acceleration, speed, cycle times, fuel usage, and engine inspection reports. And it confirmed the 2 trucks running on renewable diesel versus 2 trucks on conventional diesel, again, had no difference in performance or reliability. The renewable diesel that we are employing is made from renewable biogenic materials sourced in the United States. And it'll be supplied through an existing supply chain that we have as part of a continuing partnership with between Kennecott and Holly Frontier Sinclair, who's producing and supplying the fuel. Transitioning Kennecott completely to renewable diesel builds on a suite of decarbonisation initiatives that have reduced carbon emissions from the Kennecott operation by 65% since 2019. Combined between the US Borax operations and Kennecott copper, that will replace 11% of Rio Tinto's global diesel consumption with renewable diesel. Here in Australia, Rio Tinto continues to consume about 1.1 billion litres of fossil diesel every year. That generates nearly 3 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent. The industry as a whole in mining consumes close to 5 billion litres. Our efforts in developing solutions to decarbonise our operations reinforce the view that the longer-term solution for transitioning our mining fleet away from fossil diesel is electrification. However, that cannot be done in isolation. That is why we are committed to transitioning away from fossil diesel through parallel investment in research and development into new technologies needed, and complementary approaches, including increasing fuel efficiency and biofuels procurement. Biofuels in general, we believe, will have a critical role in Australia's energy transition as both a transitional fuel and also a long-term abatement pathway for hard-to-abate applications like aviation, heavy trucking, and also thermal heat. Globally, there are many sources, including the International Energy Agency, emphasizing the importance of biofuels and suggesting rapid growth in the industry ahead. In many regions, including Australia, the supply of sustainable biogenic feedstocks, together with relative immaturity of the biofuels market, is a critical constraint to widespread industrial adoption. Rio Tinto has been considering a market-based approach, together with the development of biofuel supply chains with the right partnerships to build a portfolio of competitive renewable diesel supply. Australia is uniquely positioned to create a biofuels industry, which has the potential to deliver broader benefits to the Australian society and the economy. It has multiple economic value creation levers, including supporting society and business in regional areas. It can contribute to fuel security. It is not contingent on any technological breakthroughs. However, it does require support and partnerships. Support is required to incentivize production and use at scale. I'm very proud of Rio Tinto's commitment to decarbonise and our journey so far, and that I've been able to share this with you. There is a lot more to do, and let's work together. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name's Mark Hammond and I'm the Chief Technical Officer at the Truck Industry Council. And I want to talk about our transition, I guess, from where we are now, which is principally sort of a diesel-based industry relying heavily on mineral-based diesel, to a carbon-neutral sector. So the Truck Industry Council, or TIC, is the peak industry body that looks after the truck manufacturers. We do still manufacture some trucks in Australia, quite a few actually, truck importers and truck distributors in Australia. And there are members up there. I'm sure you'll recognise quite a few of those brands. Now the blue circle indicates a range of diesel-electric product that organisation is marketing and selling in Australia. The green circles are battery electric vehicles that those manufacturers are selling in Australia currently. There'll be at least another 5 green circles added to that graphic by the end of this year, meaning that the majority of our members will have battery electric or zero emission vehicle offerings in Australia. What I want to talk about, I guess, is the industry as it exists now and some current realities. So there are currently just short of 750,000 trucks operating on Australian roads. We expect that to grow to 850,000 trucks by 2030. The average age of a truck in the truck fleet is 14 years. So that's average age, so total life about 28 years. So a truck sold today won't be retired from the fleet till 2052. So long asset life, as we heard from some of the other speakers, it's going to take a long time to turn over that fleet. Another interesting fact is that 90% of road freight operators operate 5 or less trucks. So we're used to seeing the Tolls and the Linfoxes, the big names out there, but the majority of trucks are actually sort of operated by very small organisations. Operators, large or small, will typically only purchase a new truck if it's commercially viable. It's purely a business decision. So unlike possibly sort of in the light vehicle sector, where people will move to a zero emission vehicle or a low emission vehicle for other reasons, in the road transport industry, it's a bottom line decision. And any increase in transport costs, so sort of any mandates that sort of that might be put on the industry over and above where we are at the moment, will potentially increase sort of the transport cost and fuel inflation and the cost of living. Another current reality, there are quite a number of sectors that there is no technical or economically viable zero emission solution for at the moment. So you're talking about line haul, we're talking about sort of mass constrained freight. So we heard sort of from Cleanaway saying that, you know, battery electric didn't work for them when they're picking up bins. I mean, that's a very heavy payload, as is concrete, as is refrigerated transport. They're quite, as is construction equipment. There are a lot of mass constrained freight operations where you can't afford to lose payload to a thumping big battery at the moment. And of course, remote area. So we you know, there's a lot of remote area, remote access transport, road transport in Australia, and there is no technically viable solution for a zero emission truck at the moment. If you look at 2023 last year, truck sales, 1% of all new truck sales last year was zero or low emission in Australia. That represented about a 400% increase of those low and zero emission vehicles over 2022. So we've certainly turned the corner. We're actually seeing sort of, you know, customers, you know, actively sort of purchasing those trucks. The split of that 1% was about 45% zero emission and 55% low emission or hybrid trucks. And we see that we don't see sort of the hybrid sort of trucks growing significantly. We don't expect too many more players in the market, but we do expect sort of zero emission trucks sales to sort of increase quite substantially as more entrants enter the market. And there's some examples of some of the trucks that were sold last year and the end customers. By 2030, TIG's forecasting that 1 in 4 trucks, or 25% of new truck sales, will be zero emission. So we're going to go from 1% last year to 25% by 2030. So that equates to about 12,000 new zero emission trucks in 2030 on our roads. In total, by the time we get to 2030, we believe there'll be about 20,000 zero emission trucks sort of on our roads. Unfortunately, that only equates to 2 to 3% of the truck fleet. So you can see that sort of 98% of the fleet is still going to require diesel. Now, I will point out that 25% uptake by 2030 is based on sort of current business as usual without any government incentives or disincentives. So that number, you know, may be altered, but we believe that the general take up by 2030 sort of under current business practices will be 25%. So I guess it's pretty obvious that we need to do something to decarbonise the existing truck fleet. That's the only way we're going to get any significant decarbonisation across the fleet in the short to medium term. And we believe the solution is both bio and renewable diesel. And we're calling for a B5 mandate by no later than 2028. And the reason we're pushing for B5, and I guess you could meet that B5 mandate with renewable diesel, but the reason we say B5 is, one, we have a biodiesel industry already in Australia. It obviously needs to grow if we're going to sort of get to a B5. But equally, it's a cheaper fuel than renewable diesel. The current fleet across sort of all trucks, both new and old, can run sort of fairly happily up to a B5. There's some OEMs that can tolerate more. You know, B7's fairly common in Europe. B5, though, we believe is probably the limit that we could run across the entire fleet and not have any operational issues. And beyond B5, then we're sort of, you know, pushing for renewable diesel. So an R5 mandate on top of that B5 mandate by no later than 2030. With the proviso, or the condition, I guess, that there's some metrics or regulation put in place that the CO2 abatement of those fuels will need to be at least 90%. And look, we remain agnostic about low carbon fuel options and how you might sort of want to calculate the CO2 abatement of those. The reason we're calling for a B5, R5 mandate is that we need to have known fuel quality sort of, so we don't affect the performance, the reliability of the existing truck fleet. So we believe that sort of a known biofuel standard, a known renewable diesel standard, we can run those two blends with mineral diesel, and we wind up with a known fuel that we know that our truck fleet can operate on reliably. And we can extend sort of that mandate pretty much most of our members can run R100. We could certainly get to R20 fairly quickly. So just, I guess in summary, we see the situation by 2030 looking a bit like this. So this is from a 21 baseline, so not the 2005 baseline, I guess, that sort of the 43% government commitment is predicated on. But so zero emission trucks are 2 to 3% saving by 2030. Low emission vehicles, so hybrids, another 1% saving. The implementation of Euro 6 emission standards, because those trucks are more fuel efficient, typically around 5% more fuel efficient. Another 1 to 2% sort of by the time we get to 2030. And a renewable R5, B5 blend, giving us a 9% saving. So you can see that the majority of the CO2 savings is going to come from that blend, mainly because it's going to run across that 850,000 trucks that will be running sort of on the road by 2030. And I guess what's interesting, everyone's talking about the 43% sort of emission target. Europe's got a 45% target, so quite similar to Australia, but their transport-specific target for Europe by 2030 is actually only 12%. So we think that, based on sort of, these different mechanisms, we can get to that. We can sort of go beyond that. I mean, we've got some other ideas about freight consolidation. There's some significant savings we could have sort of with freight consolidation across Australia too. But anyway, we see this as the stepping stone, and we think to drive an industry, a renewable fuel industry here in Australia, in Australia, that we would like to see, those mandates put in place by government. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'd like to say thank you. First to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land where we meet today, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also thank you to Bioenergy Australia for the opportunity to share our work here today. So I'm Abigail Heywood. I'm National Sustainability Manager with Lendlease for strategic projects, and I'm here with two hats on today, one as Lendlease and also Australian Constructors Association, where I'm a member of their sustainability working group. So I'm going to start with sharing Lendlease's renewable diesel journey. Contextually, Lendlease is a global integrated real estate and investment group, and our strategy is to become an investment-led business, leveraging our integrated business model to manage and create mixed-use precincts, communities, civil and social infrastructure. And you can see on the right there that our business model operates under three core lines of business: investments, development and construction. We're a 1.5 degree aligned company, and we have set ourselves ambitious science-based emission reduction targets. We set targets to be net zero by 2025, which applies to our scopes 1 and 2 emissions, and absolute zero by 2040, which applies to our scopes 1, 2 and 3 emissions within our defined boundaries. So to help us understand the pathway to absolute zero, specifically for scope 1 emissions, so I think the yellow machines running around on a construction site, we partnered with University of Queensland in 2022 to explore how we could get to fossil fuel-free construction. So the main findings were that construction's a major source of emissions and a hard-to-abate sector. The research also confirmed that electrification is the most promising decarbonisation options, but like others that you've heard from in this session, this is in the long-term timeline there, and electric options are not extensively available in the short to medium term. So therefore, the research highlighted that renewable diesel is a critical transition fuel for our sector while we wait. But we've continued to learn. Since our research, we've had first-hand experience of using renewable diesel in Australia and the barriers that came with that. And we've also learned that we're not alone, and that other sectors in the economy are in exactly the same place as us, which we've heard from today. And to give some scale of impact, I'd just like to share with you that diesel-reliant industries, they include road transport, construction, maritime, mining, rail and agriculture, in 2020 financial year represented 29% of Australian economic output and consumed 27.5 billion litres of diesel in that year. So it is a large chunk of the economy when we're talking about the opportunity for renewable diesel. And also we've learned that renewable diesel is needed for Australia to meet its net zero 2050 target. So whilst I was talking about Lendlease, I'm now going to talk about Australian Constructors Association. So the Australian Constructors Association represents leading construction and infrastructure contracting companies. ACA is the only representative body for contractors delivering vertical and horizontal construction projects, as well as undertaking infrastructure asset management. ACA members construct and service the majority of major infrastructure projects built in Australia every year. Our goal is to create a more sustainable construction industry. There are various committees and advisory groups that underpin the work of the ACA, and the Sustainability Working Group is one of them. Some of our members within ACA work internationally as well as here in Australia and have used renewable diesel as business as usual in other regions. You can see here on the slide collectively that members have used 21.6 million litres of renewable diesel in Europe up to the end of last year. In Australia, by comparison, our consumption of renewable diesel pales into comparison, and our global levels here, apologies, getting tongue-tied. So here in Australia, we've only used comparatively 1% of the use in the UK. So this shows that the significant renewable diesel use by our members has been catalysed by low carbon liquid fuel policies that are present in those regions, and they have enabled access to renewable diesel at cost parity, whereas this policy removes the significant barriers that we experience here in Australia. So what's holding Australia back? The same themes that have been discussed for today is that we don't have a low carbon liquid fuel policy which prevents critical market signals for domestic investment. Therefore, this leads to us not having a current supply of renewable diesel. So for us, importing renewable diesel has proven to be cost prohibitive as it doesn't receive the financial benefits that mineral diesel currently does, and it's made it more than double the cost for us to use it on our projects. So therefore, this has meant that renewable diesel is not widely used in Australia and is seen by the construction industry supply chain as new or unknown. And there's a hesitancy to use it. So this means we need to have heavy engagement with our supply chain to bring them on the journey. But in spite of this, there's still strong industry appetite for using renewable diesel. And here are some case studies of some early adopters from our membership. Acciona have used 46,000 litres of renewable diesel on a trial in McKenzie wind farm project in Queensland, and that was in dump trucks and dozers, and they had no operational impacts when comparing it with mineral diesel. McConnell Dale have trialled 1,900 litres of renewable diesel on their Western Programme Alliance project in Victoria and a Frana crane without any operational performance differences compared to mineral diesel. And Lendlease has used 85,000 litres of renewable diesel on our Powerhouse Parramatta project in New South Wales in 3 tower cranes, 1 mobile crane, without any performance issues. Looking forward, the Brisbane Olympic Games provides a huge opportunity to accelerate renewable diesel adoption in Australia. The Queensland Government's sustainability objectives already includes a commitment to target the use of 100% renewable fuels for construction phases. And whilst we acknowledge this will be a very challenging target for them to meet, it will be even harder without domestic renewable diesel. So the Olympics, we feel, provides an opportunity to catalyse domestic refining and construct the infrastructure for the Games with Queensland renewable diesel, and this would leave a legacy for all Australians. So what now? Well, ACA is advocating for change. ACA has been advocating for a domestic renewable diesel industry by partnering with Bioenergy Australia on various campaigns, writing to a meeting with ministers and government departments, and responding to policy consultation. And on behalf of the construction industry, ACA has developed a position paper for renewable diesel, and I'm delighted to launch this today, and this has now been uploaded onto the ACA website. This paper has been produced through deep collaboration with our members on the Sustainability Working Group. It calls for direct government policy intervention to rapidly accelerate both the supply and demand of renewable diesel in Australia. The paper also reviews the different options for decarbonising on-site construction activities. It advocates for a tiered approach that considers the long-term ambition of electrification whilst adopting renewable diesel in the interim. It identifies barriers and how to overcome them, and provides policy recommendations for the Australian government. So Shahana last night made a very good point about what does it look like if we don't do this. So we need to keep up the momentum. The costs of inaction for renewable diesel are significant. The case studies earlier and the trials that we've done in our industry are fantastic, and there's still room for more trials to give confidence that the performance is the same. But renewable diesel itself is well known. We use it internationally, millions of litres. So we need to start refocusing trials on actually bringing our supply chain on the journey and supporting their transition to use renewable diesel and making them ready for when domestic renewable diesel comes online. We're finding the private sector is growing impatient with not having sight of when renewable diesel will be available and affordable in Australia, and we fear we're at risk of losing engagement while we wait. We can't achieve Australia's net zero target by 2050 without renewable diesel, and whilst importing renewable diesel provides an expensive option to achieve this, it is technically feasible, we lose economic benefits from a domestic industry. So what's needed now? I could talk all day about low carbon fuel policies, but I don't think I have anything to add to all the discussions. It's critical. We need a low carbon fuel policy. I would also like to add, for the refineries in the room, I think it's amazing that you're doing sustainable aviation fuel. I keep hearing the language of renewable diesel being a byproduct of sustainable aviation fuel. So I would encourage there to be a balance where that needle is potentially not set so that renewable diesel is a byproduct. We feel there's enough demand when you're talking about nearly a third of the economic output being related to diesel industry, that it's a product offering in its own right. So all governments have carbon reduction targets. But what we found when we build government infrastructure, that they're not aligned with the procurement policies. So we're asking for publicly funded infrastructure projects to require us to decarbonise our construction activities and get that critical pull through to level the playing field between contractors. We're also asking through the tender process, ask us to decarbonise construction activities. That gives us something to respond to. And as a sector, we need to prioritise the use of electric machinery where it's available and use biodiesel, I should add, as an option. We do use that already in our sector, even though I haven't spoken as much about it today. So we need to use that where we have it now, as well as renewable diesel, where electric options are not available. Thank you very much.
Okay, so lucky last. Thanks very much, Bioenergy Australia, for providing the invitation to come along today. So this is our first sort of foray into this space, and in terms of being involved with Bioenergy Australia, and I think it's a great opportunity to be more involved in strategic sort of influencing, I guess. We obviously represent agriculture in terms of the New South Wales Department of Agriculture. I work closely with Liz Hutton and John O'Connor, who are both here today, and this presentation is on their behalf. But basically, I guess ag is one of those hard to abate sectors. It's got all the same characteristics that mining and transport, etc. has. They've got people working in remote areas, high horsepower, long duty cycles, and they need a reliable, simple fuel that, that's how ag has evolved. And basically, I think a little about, and this is really, I guess, preaching the convert, and this little mistake here around the emissions for 2030 should be in 2050. But there's a drive to, I guess, improve the situation of agriculture. Ag's about 84% of its energy comes from diesel. So it's highly dependent on that. That's unlikely to change. There has been a big push for electrification in terms of irrigation plant, etc., and small machines, and horticulture and other aspects, like things like dairy and intensive industries, are well placed to move into a more electrified or hybrid sort of technologies. The big horsepower requirements for cropping and for more extensive agriculture require diesel and are likely to into the future. They need the torque, we need the long duty cycles, we need the durability and the simplicity of fixing those things, because often we haven't got technicians that have got high-end skills. We've got people that know how to fix a diesel engine and have done that for a very long time, and most farmers can do that themselves. In terms of technology to replace, there's a big drive obviously to move to electrification. I think there are opportunities for partial hybridisation. We've got a smaller diesel engine driving electric drive plant, which I think improves efficiencies. We've got a truck at the moment doing that same thing, but there are limitations to do that, and things like hydrogen are very difficult to manage in remote, dusty environments with high vibration. I agree with all the other speakers. I think renewable fuels are probably a more viable pathway forward. And again, we've got the same issues with long-lived assets. You've got assets that are worth, many hundreds of thousands of dollars, and people need to get to exploit those as far as they can before they make further investments. Agriculture also is very volatile. You're actually in an environment which is highly variable in terms of the weather. So you've got the problem with climatic variability, and you've got small margins on a global market. So making investments and big changes to investments is really a very careful decision, because you can run yourself into the ground very quickly. The solution for us, and we've sort of been on a bit of a pathway, my colleagues and I, we've come from a different end of this, and I credit Jock O'Connor for this. We started with this situation. We thought hydrogen might have been the solution. So we went down that pathway, and Jock's run a series of webinars called the Beyond Diesel series, which some of you may have been involved with, or at least seen on the YouTube. Where we've sort of went from the other end. Okay, look, what sort of technology can we use to replace the existing plant if this is the big problem? And we looked at, biomethane, we looked at hydrogen, we looked at fuel cell technologies, and renewable diesel seemed to be the winner in terms of, it's a straight drop in replacement. It meets OEM requirements. It gives us nearly the same, energy intensity, and we have the same sort of supply chain and maintenance. So it seems like the solution. And I agree. I think this little pathway that is one of the reports that we commissioned was really, I guess, taking ag into the future, where we're looking at a potential, net zero fuel supply and utilisation system. There are various technologies along the way, but I think renewable fuels and potentially biofuels to some degree provide some of those solutions. I guess the issue we've got for ag is it's a price taker. So unlike, I think, some of the other industries, ag in Australia is basically an export market. So we produce a lot of product, the bulk of it, about 70% is exported. The issue with all these different technologies in terms of different ways to get to these renewable fuels is the cost. We've got sort of all the different technologies, all the different feedstocks, they're all dearer than the fossil alternative. And that is a bit of a challenge for ag, because we can't pass the cost on. So I think that's, I guess, part of the message you want to get across today is when you think about how to do this, we need to understand how we can get that cost down to a level that farmers will adopt it, otherwise they won't adopt it. To give you a bit of an idea about how marginal, I guess, the returns in ag can be, and this is just some very preliminary work that Ross Kingwell's done in Western Australia. This came off the back of some work, I guess, but what inspired it was the Ukraine-Russia war, which disrupted the gas supply chains and then affected both fertiliser and fuel production and supply. They had small changes to key inputs, fossil inputs, fertiliser, diesel and petrochemicals, has a dramatic impact on how profitable it is per hectare. So moving forward, we're looking at the diesel challenge today. Those other key inputs, which are fossil-based inputs, particularly nitrogen in fertilisers and some of the petrochemicals, are all subject to the same sorts of challenges we've got here, but also have a big impact on profit. And this is in a normal year. You know, not every year is a great year where you're getting good commodity prices or high yields. We're exposed to both price volatility and also production volatility driven by rainfall. So they're sort of important things to consider. I think there's a real opportunity for ag to be obviously a feedstock provider. My colleague here, Kath Carney and Fabiana, have been working for a long time on doing, I guess, a spatial biomass assessment as part of a national project. Kath's got a program which she's demonstrating down the foyer here today, and I'd encourage you to go and see Kath and have a chat to her. But it's quite a good way to sort of start to get your head around what is the biomass potential of, I guess, the land mass we live on, and what's the potential for that to provide a feedstock for these new fuels as we move forward. Just a little bit of a lead into the break. So we've been playing, I guess, with this for a little while and trying to take, I guess, this new technology and these new things, like the other guys have with their pilots, to the masses. So early this year, part of the New South Wales Decarbonising, we invested in a new truck. We bought a diesel-electric Hino truck from Wagga, and I think it was the first Hino diesel-electric truck to be sold in Wagga, and we're running that on renewable fuel. So through Cliff and Simon are here today, we sourced 8,000 litres of HVO 100 and have got that on standby. I think we've gone through about 1,000 litres of that. So that truck's been quite an integral part of our extension program, our education program. We used it as our tow vehicle for our H-Cuts trailer. So we've used this as a bit of a conversation starter for farmers around energy, not just diesel and sort of HVO, etc., but also electricity on farm and how they can make some improvements in efficiencies and also moving to more renewable fuels. This has been a real winner. We've had quite a number of people run through this. We go to most of the major field days. We've been to the Denny Ute Muster. We've got it here this afternoon down at the jetty. We offer free haircuts. Farmers are always keen on a free haircut. It's not all of them have got hair, but anyway, they all come in for a haircut. We have a bit of a chat and we start to talk and explore the options around, you know, this energy transition. And in that way, we take them on a bit of a pathway. We get to the point where hydrogen is probably not likely to be the viable thing for them in the short term in some mini applications, but that then leads into discussion around the fuel oils or the renewable diesels, etc., and how that can be made and the role, I guess, green hydrogen can play in producing some of those. Even into the long term where we start to look at, you know, the P2X technologies where we've got power to liquid, which seems to be a much more viable thing down the track. But people need hope, and I think these sorts of things are actually quite a good way to inspire people and start to ask them questions about how we move forward. And that's it. I'd just like to thank you.
I'm not quite sure. I expected a conversation on haircuts as we're talking about renewable fuels. So that was an interesting end. So thank you, Mark. So we're up to a bit of a Q&A session now. So like the session before, we thought we would just throw it open. So if you've got questions, please raise your hands and microphones will be passed around. So I'll start off with a couple of questions I prepared earlier and throughout. But certainly, if you have a question, please show your hand, and we'll come straight to you. Willem, I thought I'd start with you, if that's okay. I don't know if we've got a mic down the front. We do. Excellent. You're all ready. I was just wanting to ask how important HVO is to your compliance strategy for the safeguard mechanism.
Thank you for that question.
With gritted teeth.
As you would have seen on the last slide that I had up, we do foresee in the bottom right piece that we're working hard on electrification, as you know. And then there's the middle piece on that chart that shows how we see renewable diesel and also known as HVO as playing a part in meeting our decarbonisation objectives. And I certainly want to talk about it more about decarbonising than about meeting compliance. I think that's certainly the view we would like to take.
Great, thank you, thank you. Any questions in the room? Got one.
Hi, Lisa Randona from Marina. Another question for you, William, and it's probably related a little bit. So you mentioned obviously electrification is more or less the long-term strategy, but in the short to medium term, renewable fuel, renewable diesel can play a key role, especially in the mining operations. I was interested to know, do you see a role for renewable diesel in the refining operations, specifically like the Rio's alumina refining operations at all?
There's certainly different pathways for different applications. And so we talk a lot about hard to abate applications, and I think those are where renewable diesel is going to be particularly important. So in refining applications, for example, there could be different pathways and alternatives to consider there.
Thanks.
Very good. Alan, I might just come to you before we go back to the audience, if that's okay. You mentioned shipping being bound by international regulations. What does it really mean for you when you say that?
Sure, Lisa. I think for everybody's benefit, in 2021, the IMO, International Maritime Organization, brought in decarbonisation regulations across the world fleet that we're all operating under now. First, they leveled the fleet basically with an emissions data point. Some vessels had to slow down. Some of our vessels had to slow down. Now we're moving on to carbon intensity, where all the world fleet are basically ranked A to E, just like a report card from school, on your carbon intensity per ship. There's lots of controversy around that, the way they're measuring it, but I'll set that aside. So that's something that we need to manage from a brand point of view and a sustainability point of view. But I think the more important one is going forward from 2024 is each vessel has to reduce their emissions by 2% per annum going forward now into the future. So if you don't have options, like there are little things you can do around the edges to improve your vessel's performance. Those are well known. We've implemented them. But when you really want to make step change, there are very few options. The only other option available to ship owners is slow that ship down, reduce emissions. However, if you slow that ship down, you reduce capacity, you reduce cargo carrying capacity, and guess what? You need to bring another ship in to cover, and that makes no sense. So that's why, you know, we are so strongly supportive of the biofuel option. Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful. Thank you. Any questions? Yep.
Actually, a question for Alan. This is Peter Knight, Real Assets. Alan, you mentioned some of the supply chain issues that you've got from the maritime sector with renewable diesel. Clearly, part of that's an investment in production, but there also has to be distribution issues that you're facing. I'm curious, from a maritime sector, in terms of getting renewable diesel supply chains built out in Australia, could you elaborate a bit more on what needs to happen?
Yeah, Peter, thanks. Good afternoon, by the way. Look, I think it's less about the supply chain. We've got the players in the room that have the infrastructure, have the supply chain. I think it's more about supply, honestly, but I would defer to my colleagues, Visa, BP, Nestle, others that would comment to that. But I don't necessarily think it's a logistics issue. It certainly wasn't for us in Canada, but that's where I sit. Maybe there's comment from your side, Robert.
Yeah, I think when you look at all different sectors are all actually pushing forward with different actually solutions as such. So biofuels, maybe for marine, renewable diesels for other parts, and then SAF. There's no doubt there's constraint in terms of the infrastructure currently to store all these products and bring them to market, but that's not a limiting factor. It just requires the necessary investment in infrastructure and demand signalling from use to allow Viva or any other hydrocarbon supplier as such to bring those solutions to the market. So very much we're looking forward to supplying, but obviously we need to rely on obviously demand signalling and obviously policy and other triggers to enable that investment on a local front.
yeah, certainly a common theme, isn't there, around demand signals supporting investment. Yeah. Sorry, I spotted here first.
Mine was just a quick one for Michael. When you got the farmers in the haircut trailer, do you remind them that when Rudy Diesel first designed the diesel engine, his intent was that it was to be run on biodiesel by agricultural people?
They remind me.
Hi, Catherine from DPERD in WA. This question's for the entire panel, but I was just wondering if anyone had any thoughts on what the impact of the fuel tax credit scheme is on renewable diesel uptake.
I can just share our, I guess, our UK experience as Lendlease. Any policy that, as we found from the policy intervention there, that we've got cost parity on a demand sense. So we found that a really key piece of legislation, and that's enabled us to become 100% fossil fuel free in all our construction operations in the UK. So critical. Absolutely critical to making it a product we can operationalise and get out of this position we're in at the moment where we're trialling and actually shift into operation. That's what I'd love to do here. That's why we need low carbon liquid fuel policy. We should have like a bit of a bingo for every time it's said today, because I think we'd be up to quite a
I've
quite
lost
a
count.
few.
I've lost
Yeah,
count.
it's a lot. It's definitely the key message.
Yeah,
I think
I was just going to say that in the road transport, heavy vehicle road transport sector, it's certainly, the fuel tax credit is certainly a mechanism that could be used to incentivise renewable fuels, biofuels, compared to mineral diesel. That would be just another mechanism, I think, that the government could use to change the landscape sort of in terms of that, and also, I guess, you know, in terms of sort of levelling cost parity too. That said, and I probably won't win any friends here, but the 5B5R5 mandate that we're talking about, we don't actually see that that would require any government subsidies, that over and above sort of, you know, what would be given to mineral diesel in Australia. We don't believe that 10% blend would actually increase sort of transport costs substantially.
Thanks. I think we have a question over here.
Hi, I'm Simon Curry from Energy Estate. 7 short years ago, Telstra signed the first corporate renewable electricity PPA. Rio Tinto just signed a few in the last couple of weeks. 6 short years ago, Business Renewable Centre, with the help of Climate Kick and WF, got started as the first renewable buying association. I'm happy for you to do this just by show of hands. If Bioenergy Australia and Business Renewable Centre was actually going to come together and support when corporates buying renewable fuels in Australia, I mean, do you think that would make a difference? No hands? Well, that failed. So I'll just have to do it myself.
I just think we're always looking for a coalition of the willing, and the more momentum we can get behind this, the better. So my answer would be yes.
I think it echoes, obviously, this morning's discussions around the collaboration requirements. Obviously, as a fuel supplier, as customers, as policy, as industry associations, all need to be pulling in the same direction to enable this. So I think, again, collaboratively working together to drive a common agenda will hopefully accelerate the adoption of, in this case, renewable diesel. But we shouldn't obviously underestimate that there is a number of key players who are involved, and you all heard about them today to bring this to fruition. So we're on the journey, and we're already seeing green shoots appearing. We just need to accelerate that journey at the moment.
We'll go over here first and come back to you.
David Evans for Defence Science Technology Group. I'm going to take my aviation hat off, put my diesel hat on, and I hope it don't get own goal. So this is probably a bit more for Robert, Lisa, and maybe a little bit of Alan, in that look, the focus has been really heavily on HVO, and I guess that's been because the industry's dictated with Neste's presence in the area and supply, but the commercial reality is that, especially in Australia, is that we're actually going to get an alcohol to diesel program that's going to come up. LanzaJet hopped up and said they're going to produce that. That doesn't fall into our current specifications. That's been the guidance even out in the industry. And I think the problem that we have globally is that unlike aviation's really easy. It's sexy, planes fly, it's everything wow. But the reality of diesel is such a disjointed industry between ISO, IMO, ASTM, EI, and then Australia sits and we're trying to be independent. So my question probably comes to the two majors, because you're going to actually have to deal with the blended product that goes to market, is that how do you guys protect the consumer on different pathways that are going to come through that may not meet the standard HVO requirements, so we don't end up in situations similar to when they went from low sulphur diesel to ultra low sulphur diesel with corrosion inhibitors and high pressure common rails, things like that. And how do we get that framework going in Australia so we're not reliant on Europe or the US to actually to dictate what we actually do in Australia that's for Australia?
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, in lieu of any Australian fuel specification for renewable diesel, there's obviously in development at this stage, and we're actively part of that through our industry association, or the AIP, working with our obviously colleagues in BP, Ampol, and Exxon and others, to actually define what that standard is. You're right, it makes it difficult because you've got OEM overlays, you've got European specifications, and EN 15900 sort of spec, which deals with different issues that we currently don't have in the Australian diesel determination for conventional mineralised diesel, and simple things like flashpoint. The European spec has a lower flashpoint requirement than we have in Australia, and then that affects other things such as the ADG code, the storage and flammability against the Australian standards like 1940 and so forth. So that harmonisation is really critical, and we need to make sure that when we define that a renewable fuel spec, that it covers not only just one pathway but multiple pathways to achieve that. So I think that's where, again, particularly fuel suppliers can come to the party with obviously other customers and obviously industry itself to really set a specification which sets us up for the future, which reduces the complexity of bringing products into the marketplace as well. So I don't know, Lisa, if you had any other comments as well from your side?
Fully concur, absolutely fully concur. And I think it just underlines the point on pace and the point on action. It's these intricacies and these details that can slow us down and can mean that we take no action for some time. So I think that, again, the theme on collaboration across industry, across peers who normally compete with each other, who have to collaborate on these sorts of things, and with government is really key. We need to take these decisions and we need to take them with pace in order to move forward.
Can I please add to that as well on the fuel standards? So going to your point about OEMs, so we, all the construction machinery, the original equipment manufacturers have to warrant the use of that fuel. And the way that they do that is that it is meeting the EN standards and the ASTM. So I would encourage, as somebody who's on the front line dealing with the supply chain and the reading specifications on what Caterpillar, Komatsu, all the OEMs ask, is to not reinvent the wheel. Please, can we stick to existing standards? I think we like to put our Australian stamp on things, but the risk of that is that we will not be able to use the fuel if it doesn't meet those EN or ASTM standards, because nobody is going to put fuel in a machine if it's not warranted by the OEM. So that's a real risk for us. So just a call out to please stick to existing standards as much as possible.
Yeah, no, I guess Truck Industry Council fully supports that. I mean, we don't design or build diesel engines in Australia. We take that technology from typically sort of Europe, Japan, and the US. So yeah, we need to stick to recognised standards. We have B100 standard that's aligned sort of, with the European B100 standard, we'd like to see the same for renewable diesel too.
Sorry, one more flashpoint. I know that's been a big discussion through the development of the Australian renewable diesel standard. Just in our experience as Lendlease on our projects, the fuel that we were using hasn't breached any, or it's all been compliant with the standard. So we haven't personally experienced a lower flashpoint in the fuels that we've used.
Taku?
And Lisa, I just want to build on your point in terms of moving at pace. So I think one of the important things to do here is to take Australia's emissions reduction targets into context. And I'm not, particularly in the details of how long it takes for particular, standards and everything to update, right? And I'm not in the supply game in that framework. But I think it's all like, okay, we can do all this, but then if it takes 10 years, 12 years to do, and then you've missed the mark on emissions reduction, then there's going to be an even harder target that we're going to have to meet as Australia, right? So I think just continue to keep in mind that there's a country target out there, and then what standards and frameworks will work within that time frame. I think it's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point. Other questions? Yep.
Hi, Kristen from CMA CGM. I must say it's really pleasing after a morning of SAF, Alan, to hear you speak about maritime, so thank you very much. But in the theme of collaboration, we also saw earlier today that there's going to be a plateau when it comes to second generation fuels. Biofuels are really important for us because we can use them in the fleet that we have in this part of the world, so very, very important. But there's only so much, and obviously we don't want to compete with a feedstock that is something that's edible for human beings for obvious reasons. So I guess maybe, Robert, this is a question for you. How are you making sure that long term you can service all of your customers on sea, in the air and on land? Sorry, big question.
Massive question. And you probably saw on my slide there the number of different optionalities that we have to cater for as such. The question is that we don't exactly know yet, to tell you the truth, in terms of how we're going to satisfy every type of different energy pathway as such. And, again, liquid fuels is one that we can look at in terms of drop-ins, but we're also considering electrification, hydrogen, potentially synthetic air fuels pathways as well. So it's quite a complex landscape that we're going forward. But what I think we're encouraged by is most definitely the optionality to do something now on that stepping stone and trying to break that chicken and egg question that we always hear about in the marketplace, and particularly when I go out to talk to customers, is that when are you going to bring the supply, and equally when are you going to actually have the equipment that actually takes a hydrogen or a biofuel type of arrangement as such. But I think we've got to utilise what feedstocks are available now, and there's going to be competing interests across different sectors. We already hear it today around SAF. Obviously for aviation, we hear it now for obviously road transport or resources of mining, and again in marine, that we're all pulling from the same type of initial feedstock. So the development of that technology pathways for the next generation is critical. But acknowledge, it's going to be a very tough situation to ensure we can supply all different sectors that we currently supply hydrocarbons to.
Hello, I'm Ketty from Jet Zero Australia. I just have a question, I guess coming from a background of sustainable aviation fuel and the governing body being ICAO and CORSIA, but I can understand that with all these different industries, there's different governing bodies, but how would a sustainability certification framework work across, I guess, all these different industries? Or could there be one that's like harmonises each industry's need just to capture all the different benefits of the production pathways to make renewable diesel? This is to all the panel if anyone has any ideas. Yeah.
I'll jump in terms of, it's another great question around harmonisation again. You do have different certification policies or pathways and the like. We've got IRCC, we've got RSB, we've got CORSIA, we've got obviously localised standards as well, or driven by government. So again, it's a complex minefield, I suppose, of optionality, and particularly we see it as a critical part of building the confidence with our customers around the provenance and that traceability of that feedstock right from aggregation through to use or combustion. I think ultimately at the day, if we look at different pathways of getting this, again, similar to book and claim, it needs to be consistency and driven by either a localised policy or dovetailing into global standards, which enables us to then to transact across different type of regions. So we're not sort of forced down to go one pathway of one particular certification model and then another pathway for another certification model and industry specific. So again, a complex arrangements in terms of that, but at least we're not now starting to see those certification pathways come to the forefront and even being utilised here in Australia, but still a while to go.
I think one of the things that are critical is to make sure that, again, in the Australian context, it ties back to NGERS or ASRS reporting standards, because those institutions and reporting frameworks already exist, are well respected. It is a harmonization tool in some aspects, and our customers rely on it. So I think to the extent possible, making sure that we utilize and leverage the reporting frameworks that are already existing, so that we don't create another certification only to then back into, oh, it's not compliant with NGERS, it's not compliant with ASRS, et cetera. So I think that's a key thing for policymakers and industry to work together.
Yeah, just continue on that. That's critical, I think, and that's an education bit that I think, again, customers need to understand the local policies and development around that. They're relatively new, so we all have a place to educate the market in terms of those various emission intensity factors available under different policy and frameworks to get consistency across that as well. But again, if you have different sources, imported versus local manufacturing, there's different types of policies and certification models that make it complex.
I'd like to add to that. I think that's a fantastic question, and actually one that hasn't, probably more for tomorrow. I think they'll probably be covered, but the sustainability credentials of the feedstocks are absolutely key. So for us, it's not so much the technologies that are used, but the feedstocks around that is what we care deeply about. So there's two aspects. That with it being biological, gives you that actual carbon saving, because we, to get to net zero targets, but also the various different ways that the feedstocks can be made, all the different things that are used. Not all full feedstocks are equal. Mm-hmm. So we're really calling for transparency around that. So as a consumer, we know that we're getting a product that's made from biogenic feedstocks. It doesn't include, say, plastics and tyres. That's a product that doesn't, through our research, doesn't give us the carbon savings. So we're absolutely calling for some kind of standard, a national standard that needs to be owned by the government, and also for the transparency to the consumer. It comes again to that education piece. I think that's extremely critical.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point. Did you want to add? No. We've probably got time for just one last question. Well, waving. There's more. All right, so we'll go down the front here, but just please know we're about to head into a break, and the panel will be at afternoon tea, and you can ask as many questions as you would like over the break. So, final question. Sorry to those I didn't get to.
Yes, you can hear me now. Jennifer Lauber-Patterson, Frontier Impact Group, and also Future Energy Australia. Over the last 6 years, we've been in the process of developing renewable fuel projects in Australia, and it has been really difficult. And one thing I would like to call for is my appreciation of what you've been doing in terms of demonstrating that you can use renewable diesel in this market. In Europe, as we've been speaking about, it is commonly used. We are behind other countries, and we really do need to catch up, because it's an economic disadvantage, as you know, for Australia if we don't get this happening in Australia. And I have found it really challenging, and particularly over 2 years ago, when no one really knew what renewable diesel was. But even what we're finding now, it is, we're still doing our analysis, we're still trying to work out where we're heading. So that's actually still a barrier, that learning side from the user's perspective as well. But as I've said, what you are doing is great, and thank you. Another question and another barrier, if you're getting a new project up and running and it's an infrastructure project, you need long-term contracts. And what I am finding is, you know, there was the knowledge base, but it's then, oh, we're not sure about policies in terms of being able to do longer term contracts. Because obviously, if you're getting a project such as this to financial close, you need to actually have a longer term contract. Ideally, 10 years is what we look for, but quite often people say, oh no, we only buy from year to year. So I think there's other issues and barriers that we need to consider. So out of all of you here, who could give me at least a minimum 7-year contract at a competitive price today? And I'll do a deal with you this afternoon. Thank you.
Shipping could.
And just another quick one for the farmers. Like what I can see happening is, because there is a lot of analysis being done as we can work out that renewable diesel actually is a very important answer as part of the fuel mix. You know, the challenge around that is we will have sort of like a crisis of people trying to buy fuel. The price will go up. There'll be limited access in Australia if we don't get onto it now. But how do the farmers get access to the fuel? Because there'll be so much demand for big corporates reducing their carbon footprint. How do the farmers get access? So that's the other issue that I see as well.
Yeah, they're going to get access through the fuel distribution networks they've already got, but it's the price, you know, that's what it's going to drive it. I tend to agree. I think maybe a shandying down of, you know, B5 and R5 or something like that, it's probably the best, across the whole supply chain is probably an easy way to do that. But the farmers are price sensitive and they won't make the transition unless they have to. Some of them will because of the credentials and what they want to try and do, but they are, you know, price takers and they can't pass it on. So I think that's a bit of a challenge. And we're actually just doing some economic analysis at the moment across, I've got an economist doing sensitivity assessment across the 3 key fossil inputs into farming, so fertiliser, petrochemicals and diesel, across 4 different farming systems in New South Wales. So that'll be interesting. I'll be able to share those results next year. But yeah, farmers are price takers and they will be very sensitive about, you know, higher input costs. Yeah.
And just on that, it's one of the reasons that we're pushing for a B5R5 mandate to ensure that there's a bit of a level playing field, that it's not just going to, the renewable fuels, biofuels won't just go to sort of those that can afford it. I mean, if you look at road freight, you know, there's some road freight companies and their end customers that can afford to pay substantially more sort of for road freight at the moment, mainly because the freight portion of the delivered good isn't actually that high. I mean, if you look at a computer or a mobile phone or something, sort of the freight component is actually quite small when you look at the delivered cost of that good to the customer. Whereas if you look at goods on a supermarket shelf, the percentage of freight in that is substantially higher and is a lot more sensitive sort of to the cost of a cost increase in fuel. So yeah, I guess, you know, we're pushing for that B5R5 mandate to be rolled across industry as a bit of a level playing field, and then that mandate could potentially grow to, you know, 15, 20 over a period of time.
Yeah, great. And with that, this conversation, it seems, could go on for a little longer, or a lot longer. And I think, as we saw in the aviation conversation before lunch, this, despite the fact that these are drop-in fuels that we're talking about, or a drop-in solution, there's complexity. There's complexity and it's spread across multiple end users, multiple industries. And so that collaboration word, I think, is key. And it's forums like these that are really important so that we can connect with each other beyond this to help solve, I guess, the challenge that we're all facing. So thank you for what was a very long post-lunch session. It's really great to see. I don't think anyone fell asleep post their lunch, which is fantastic. It just goes to show the interesting sessions that all of our presenters presented today. So a big thank you to our panel and a big thank you to you.